Hey, Daniel, welcome to our inaugural interview format here. You were one of our first customers, so it seems fitting that we launched this interview format with you. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.
So we at Atrium, we spend a lot of time in the market helping to identify use cases, helping companies to think about how do they structure programs around analytics and artificial intelligence. As you know, it can be a little bit tricky between how do you get the business teams, the IT teams, the data scientists all working together in a good way. Your experience is timely, Daniel, as a lot of institutions, as you know, are starting to figure out how do they migrate more online given all that's going on in the world around COVID. And it sounds like maybe one of your first learnings was just kind of the whole area of data. And I'm curious, how would you take that learning and advise institutions that are wanting to take more advantage of like operational analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, getting to more online formats? How should they be thinking about, what are the big areas to consider before entering the scene there?
It's a great question. And maybe start by saying every institution's different missions, different operating models. I mean, very different data footprints. And so, part of this is just customizing a data strategy for your organization. But I think the starting point for me is thinking about data not in the silos of the functional areas of your institution, but thinking about it on the student life cycle, and that you're engaged with learners, far before they start at your institution, and you'll be engaged with them to some degree after they leave your doors. And all of that kind of creates a data footprint. And you adopting that kind of end-to-end or holistic mindset allows you to think about how do you use that data to drive performance improvements across that life cycle. And so while this is challenging for a way a lot of institutions are, the data architecture exists today. But Chris, as you know from our work, for example, things that you understand about students during the enrollment phase are really helpful when you think about planning to support them during their academic study.
Yep, that's great.
I think two is maybe align your roadmap to start answering discrete questions, because that will get you off the starting base. And
yes,
I think there is a school of thought there. People start and they integrate everything on campus, and this can be a very lengthy and complex process. Now, ultimately, probably necessary if you want to have next level analytics and machine learning capabilities, but you don't have to start there. And so, and something I think you helped us do through the Atrium engagement was kind of start small. So have that roadmap, but start small and start returning value quickly. And as I've said to you previously, this flip from talking about analytics to saying we're doing it now, and the power of that across the organization to have it brought to life, and it's no longer something on the roadmap, or it's no longer a theoretical issue, but it's something that the organization is already doing today.
So you bring up some great topics there, and one of them is like, if I wait for my perfect data to get these programs going, you're gonna be waiting a long time, right? So we all need to figure out how do we get started. And I think you posed it in a great way, which is a lot of times we're working with companies to help them first think about what question do they want to answer. And it's a pretty tactical thing. If you were to answer that question, would it be meaningful for your business? Do you have signal and data to support that in some small way to get started? And if you found the signal and the data, is there something that you could thread into your organization where there's a lot of people that could act on it on scale? That's kind of what we're coaching companies to think about when they're thinking about getting started in a use case, and couldn't be more fitting to start small, but have that vision of where you want to go. Of the student life cycle itself, if you were to kind of break down some of the elements, are there particular areas that you're bullish on seeing analytics play a big role, or machine learning play a big role in the next couple of years?
Maybe my first thought is there's no shortage of opportunities, but my mind goes to supporting students. And I think there's tremendous value to be gained from leveraging these things to help students succeed. And the challenge there is marrying the data insight to the toolkit you have on campus, or could potentially obtain to help support those students. That being said, and this certainly timely with what's going on. I don't think it's a surprise that a lot of institutions are reporting they're under significant financial stress, and that financial stress comes with tremendously long list of problems that have to be solved now, from what to do about reunions to sports to the whole range of things that institutions are involved in, and all of them are pressing. But having a response to the revenue problem I think, will be the fundamental challenge facing institutions in the next year or two. I can't think of a better way to start answering that than building up a robust data strategy.
So it sounds like get a data structure in place, get a roadmap, identify a question you want to answer as a starting point. These are all things that institutions should be thinking about when they want to embark on a journey. How about any coaching you'd give institutions on just the players that should be involved, right, to make these things successful? Like, we see this very interesting thing where over the past years in the technology landscape, it was always kind of a two-party negotiation between business and IT. And now in the analytics space and with artificial intelligence, it becomes like a three-party negotiation instead, where you're speaking, statistics and math with IT, with, educational or business trends, and getting all those constituents together in an effective way can be pretty difficult. So any coaching you'd give institutions on how to think about structuring their teams?
One, I guess, harkening back to the point I had, which is if you can get a team together to prototype something and bring it to life, that helps set up the terms of discussion for a whole other set of stakeholders. Because as you know, in this work, you're never quite done. You
right.
get through the first wave of issues and you end up with a whole other set of questions. And you're so much better able to anticipate what this is going to look like once you have an initial example. So I know it flies in the face of some of the challenges, or it just kind of ducks them. But to say if you can incubate something along these lines, it goes a long way. Two is recognizing that everybody does have a piece of the puzzle here.
Yep.
And to your point about this three-party conversation, you got to have well-articulated business goals. So the business owners, whether it's the program director, they have to be invested and understand the value that this is going to bring. But similarly with the IT group, it has to be communicated how this fits into the architecture and how this may or may not duplicate efforts and tools and tactics they already have. And third, a data scientist or a firm that specializes in this will come in with a whole other perspective.
Sure.
And again, I guess the best practice here would just stay focused on the business outcomes. You can meaningfully increase your retention rates. You can meaningfully improve your marketing performance. You can grow your programs faster. I mean, these are all things that are very possible. So as much as that can help kind of cut through the challenges of aligning around this, just understanding that this is being deployed by your peers and this is having large business impacts can help be a call to action.
So it sounds like, again, kind of start small, get into prove it mode a bit, probably cross-functional team that can represent the entire student life cycle, people that are operationally minded, so diverse sets of skills that can understand, the institutional implications, the technology implications, the implications around data and statistics.
This is challenging. But there's a really big payoff here. And so it does test ways of working. And it may seem, I've talked to a lot of folks who say, great machine learning AI, I kind of get it, but I can't get, the KPI dashboard I want today. So how is that even possible?
Yeah.
And I think it's even understanding that some of these challenges are all linked in that machine learning or AI can be the forcing function that aligns a lot of people and processes that solve a whole other range of problems. And I would, I think in our work with you, we solved some underlying data architecture issues in service of driving the machine learning and predictive modeling work, but it allowed us to make better forecasts about student starts as a byproduct. It allowed us to communicate with our academic partners more clearly about what was going on. And so maybe that last piece would be expect value along the pathway if you do this correctly, that it's not a black box that takes 2 years to get the answer, but along the way, I find that often people are surprised on how helpful this is at accomplishing other related data and analytics objectives.
So don't get so intimidated that you don't start, right? Chip away at it is kind of the gist.
That's right.
2 more questions for you, Daniel. Let's see. So this transformation you're talking about, how much is the pandemic and COVID going to either accelerate that or slow it down?
This is a time to kind of rethink some of those fundamental challenges or some of the pressures that we've seen building for years. So I guess my bet, like all things, is it will kind of stratify, but you'll see some folks kick into high gear, probably with initiatives they have already planned, but will be going much faster on them.
Yeah.
And I think everybody's waiting to see how this all shakes out, but that's, ubiquitous. Again, maybe I would stress that higher ed's not any different. I work with a lot of corporations who are still very much on the fence about what exactly this means. And Grace, I know you work all across industries as well. So, maybe there are some lessons for higher ed about how to approach this from what others are doing.
Yeah, and what we're seeing across the board, regardless of industries, I think you've got a whole group of companies that are kind of in survival mode, right? I got to get to tomorrow. And I think our charter that we're trying to hold ourselves to is how do we help companies start thinking about taking a few steps forward and getting out of a fully defensive posture to starting to adapt and be resilient. And so I think it sounds like that'll play out from your perspective in the education space as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're increasingly making high stakes decisions in a rapidly changing environment, you're going to increasingly have to, either for your stakeholders up or your stakeholders across campus, increasingly have a clear rationale of here's the business options and here's the decisions and why we're making them.
Yep.
And having that data backing, is not sufficient to drive those conversations, but it's certainly helpful. So I would expect more focus on how do we get to ground truth and how do we have again, I always think about analytics as kind of this neutral third party observer that you can always refer to, especially, I've seen a lot of conversations on campus kind of swirl because everybody has their opinion about what's going on. Right. And it's impossible to reconcile because they kind of look at different part of the puzzle. So it's not even a straight on disagreement. Like I think it's X and you think it's Y. It's just I'm focusing over here and you're focusing over there.
Right.
And the more that you have this machine learning kind of, it's part of your nervous system of decision making, the easier it is, I think, to navigate these challenges.
That's a great takeaway. And then final question for you. So I've got my oldest daughter's going to college in a few months, I think, hopefully. And given hopefully campuses will be open 20 years from now, you and I are kind of in the predictions business. So 20 years from now, what are we gonna still recognize around education? What aren't we gonna recognize?
When you said your daughter's going next year, I feel like the 1 year horizon maybe have a little bit better. The 20 year, we don't have the robust data to draw on, but I think the business models are going to change. And I think that's where I work with institutions the most clearly is how do you use data, understand your business model options. And I think it's not a minority opinion to say the business of how higher education is transacted. Now, the core academic product, a tremendous value prop. I'm a believer in that. I think the returns to higher education, and people point to different data sets. The return is robust, and it continues to be.
Yeah.
And having a college degree, I'm a believer, is going to power people in their life and careers successfully. But the business model of how that is consumed and transacted, I think, is going to change.
Yep.
And so that's where we work with folks to think about how do you have a revenue generation platform perspective, where you're really adopting the power of your data and business case analysis and scenario planning and simulations to understand, what are the implications if you, change pricing models or radically do something different about articulation pathways or alternative on-ramps. I mean, there's a whole host of interesting things going on out there. But how do you understand the implications, for your specific institution, and how do you make the right call? I think what's going to be a high stakes decision. So
that's great. So the promise of education, the benefit, it'll still be there 20 years from now. If the data sets, as you mentioned, are robust, it's worth it now. It'll be worth it in the future. The question will be like, what format and how do we experience it? It sounds like.
When people talk about the future of education, what number of jobs are going to change? You could really tell me any number at this point, like in the next 5 years, the next 3 years. The statistics, obviously there is an empirical number here, and there are experts who come up with it. But generally, the idea that the 50% of the skills in the workforce are going to be different 5 years from now.
Yeah,
you're going to talk about such a hunger and need for specific skills-based training, but also the capacity to learn, the capacity to work with others in an ever-changing environment. So I think there's no doubt that the need and the returns, to learners from engaging in higher education will increase.
One final bonus question, Daniel. What do you?
Yes.
How are you? You've graduated from Pearson per se. What are you doing next? Tell us about where you're investing your time.
So I spend my time in two ways. One, with a company we founded called Ormond, which helps colleges and universities develop analytics roadmaps and start implementing some of the kind of best in breed tools that we see. And they're not, where we play is kind of in the middle market. So more sophisticated than kind of some of the basic analytics, but less complicated or less complex and computationally sophisticated is the work you do at Atrium, I guess to put it on that
Sure.
continuum. So, and that's tremendously rewarding, and we're in conversations with institutions all the time, trying to help them figure this out. And then two, I work with employers thinking through their workforce strategies. So how they can better align the skills they need to competencies and skill-based courses, and those can be delivered at an institution or outside, but helping them leverage the range of options, and then powering some of the workforce analytics behind that. So are they closing their skill gaps? Are their employees progressing, to succeed, help the company succeed in the future? So while they're kind of different customer sets, I think broadly this idea of how do you use data to make better decisions, and how do you think about, again, if you extend that student life cycle, that, what I think about is how do I help learners kind of achieve through their life, and that extends to, when they're off in their career, and again, for that rapidly changing economy, are they having the tools and skills needed to continue to succeed?
Well, thanks for sharing that, Daniel. One thing I know about you, you're going to be tremendously successful in that endeavor, knowing you. So let's close down the interview here. So the goal of today was we wanted to bring some real world approaches, right, around analytics and machine learning to the education space. And I think you've outlined some amazing topics and a great framework to think about here. So as far as delivering on the promise of this interview, thank you so much. You gave us some great things to think about. And we'll look forward to following you in your journey with your two new endeavors. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Chris.